Now, the next speaker is Kamna Muddagouni, and she is a senior lawyer with the Equality Law Program at Victoria Legal Aid. Please, Kamna, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered here today, the people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and any leaders and members of any Aboriginal communities present today. I'd like to in particular... Sorry, I'm just going to fix the mic. There we go. I would like to in particular acknowledge Aboriginal women who have been leaders in their communities and societies advocating for the rights of women and injustices faced by women, and their continuing work in this space in raising awareness and seeking justice for women within their community. So I thought I'd start today by providing you with a bit of background about my daily work, how it intersects with the Me Too movement and facets of gender inequality and gender violence. I'm a senior lawyer in the Equality Law team at Victoria Legal Aid, and in my role I advise and act for clients who experience discrimination and sexual harassment in their life and seek to achieve outcomes to address the harm caused to them by this treatment. Being a lawyer at Victoria Legal Aid, which is the statutory agency responsible for providing legal assistance to clients who are unable to access legal services for a myriad of financial and other social exclusion barriers, I provide this advice to clients who are often vulnerable prior to their experience of discrimination and harassment. I therefore see on a daily basis the ways in which an experience of discrimination and harassment can compound the harm and disenfranchisement for many vulnerable people and workers. In my role at Victoria Legal Aid, I work to find strategic and broader solutions to the current systems which may not provide systemic outcomes for addressing the rates of discrimination and harassment in our society. Personally, I'm also a board member of an organisation called Fair Agenda, which is a not-for-profit which campaigns on issues of gender inequality, including the reproductive rights of women, adequately funded and resourced family violence services, and a comprehensive response to sexual assault on college campuses. As a part of that board, I can see the intersections between sexual violence and exclusion and how they impact the inclusion and safety of women in various aspects of public life. Lastly, and somewhat obviously perhaps, I myself am also a young woman, someone who has a daily experience of a society in which I have to navigate various systemic and individualised examples of discrimination on the basis of my gender, and find opportunities in that society to work towards a more equal and safer world for women. It is these lenses with which I wish to talk to you today about the issues surrounding Me Too and more broadly gender inequality in our community. I thought I would focus on three aspects of this very broad and somewhat complex topic: the legal context, the extent of the problem and barriers to justice, and potential reforms of sexual harassment protections that could result in a more comprehensive response to this very massive problem. Many of you might know of Me Too as an online hashtag, a headline or a story of a high-profile celebrity's experience. But the Me Too movement brought to light the stories of many women across the world and in Australia who have been sexually harassed or experienced some form of sexual violence. The Me Too movement has in some ways created a space for a much broader discussion about how prevalent sexual harassment is and the ways in which our society and legal system can do more to protect women from sexual harassment. So the legal context in Victoria, and how does it sort of intersect with the problem of sexual harassment? Sexual harassment is prohibited under both Federal Sex Discrimination Act and the Victorian Equal Opportunity Act in what are called areas of public life. So these areas of public life include education, the provision of goods and services, accommodation, and perhaps what's been most commonly publicised in workplaces. Sexual harassment, as Minister Hutchins mentions, has a much broader meaning than sexual violence or sexual assault. It's defined as any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature in circumstances where a reasonable person would apprehend that the person who's receiving that behaviour might be offended or humiliated. Intention or motive is not relevant, and the focus is on the nature of the behaviour and how a victim might reasonably be expected to feel. It includes everything from sexual advances, comments about a person's appearance, inappropriate touching, behaviours that might constitute sexual assault or rape, as well as lewd jokes and displays of pornographic material. The protections under both federal and Victorian law mean that a person who is subjected to sexual harassment can bring a complaint to a Human Rights Commission, a court or a tribunal and seek redress for the conduct. This could include an order requiring training in that particular workplace or service provider, an apology and compensation for either a loss of earnings or the hurt and humiliation that they have incurred as a result of that sexual harassment. There have been decisions in as recent as the past 5 years in Australian courts which have seen a recognition by the courts that the amount of compensation in matters of proven sexual harassment should be significant. There was a full court of the Australian Federal Court decision of Richardson and Oracle in 2014 in which the full court said, in increasing an award for compensation to the victim, that a low award of damages did not reflect current community standards and expectations about the sum of compensation that should be awarded for the real pain and suffering caused to victims who experience sexual harassment and their loss of enjoyment of life. This was reflected in a Victorian decision of VCAT in Collins and Smith in 2015 that said that the tribunal should be minded to the need to eliminate sexual harassment to the greatest possible extent and to encourage the identification and elimination of this behaviour. If sexual harassment happens in a workplace, the victim can not only seek an outcome against a perpetrator, but an employer or the workplace for failing to make or take all reasonable steps for preventing the behaviour from occurring in the first place. This current legal context, however, does not do one thing. It does not impose a positive obligation on an employer to ensure that sexual harassment is not occurring in the first place. Nor does the current system provide any real or well-resourced enforcement powers to an external body to take steps in the absence of a victim being able to make a complaint. So, having outlined the legal context, what I want to get to now is about how prevalent this problem really is. It goes beyond an online hashtag or an online social movement. It's a serious problem for our community, and the statistics are truly alarming. 72% of Australians have been sexually harassed at some point in their lives. Specifically, 85% of Australian women over the age of 15 have been sexually harassed at some point in their lives. And in the last 5 years, more than 1 in 3 women have experienced sexual harassment at work. People aged between 18 and 29 are more likely than those in other age groups to have experienced sexual harassment at work. 40% of workplace sexual harassment incidents were witnessed by at least one other person. Yet fewer than 1 in 5 people made a formal report about their experience of sexual harassment. These statistics are recent. They were collected as part of a 2018 National Phone Survey on Workplace Sexual Harassment by the Australian Human Rights Commission and were published just a couple of months ago. These damning statistics also do not exist in isolation. They're compounded and should be seen in the context of the other statistics we unfortunately know too well about women's experiences of family violence and gendered violence. Together they paint a picture of a serious and systemic issue in our community of gender inequality that is increasing, impacting young people, and that manifests in actual physical, psychological, and/or economic harm to women. So what then is the gap between a legal system which seems to say pretty clearly that sexual harassment is not okay, courts and tribunals that regard the harm caused by sexual harassment as significant, and yet a society in which sexual harassment remains prevalent, common, and with few complaints being made? There are, in my view, a few causes to this divide which play critical roles in thinking about solutions. Firstly, the onus or burden of bringing a claim in our current legal system remains mostly on the victims of the harassment. As you can imagine, there are many hurdles a victim can face in bringing a claim. The impact on their health, their concerns about risks to their job, loss of economic security, their inability to find legal assistance, their lack of knowledge about what options they might have in bringing a claim, and their inability to pursue a claim through a complex system without feeling supported by an institution are just some of the concerns that clients I speak to about sexual harassment raise. There needs to be reforms to our legal system that allows a sexual harassment claim to be enforced by either a Human Rights Commission or a workplace health and safety agency or some other body without the burden falling on victims to have to pursue complaints themselves. This will recognise the very true power imbalance at play when expecting victims to bring justice and influence employers to understand that there are greater risks if they do not take active steps to stop sexual harassment. Secondly, legal change needs to be supported by public education campaigns that address expectations of harassment-free workplaces and the role that all workers should play in stopping sexual harassment. We should be less concerned about the impact on a person accused of sexual harassment and their reputation than we are about the very cultures in our workplaces and our communities that allow this behaviour to continue. Thirdly, there needs to be a recognition that sexual harassment has a real link to the health and safety of all workers and should be given the same importance or concern when employers are addressing risks, for example, of physical injury or deaths at workplaces caused by bad occupational practices. There needs to be a clear positive duty on an employer to stop sexual harassment, and their failure to meet this duty should have real ramifications. Lastly, there needs to be adequate non-legal support systems in place for people who experience sexual harassment, including well-resourced mental health support. In my experience with clients who have been subjected to sexual harassment, there is inevitably an impact on their mental health. In the national survey I spoke about earlier, it was found that the most common negative consequence of workplace sexual harassment was an impact on a victim's mental health or stress. We need to ensure people who experience sexual harassment have access to proper support services as well as legal protections. The Me Too movement has done well to bring to light the need for a conversation about how we reduce sexual harassment, given the prevalence of stories by women everywhere. And it also creates a possibility for us to take the conversation further and make real changes to ensure a society of gender equality where women feel safe at work and respected. Thank you.